Call the meeting to order and welcome everyone.
Recording in progress.
Oh, I forgot. We'll get a recording in progress. Got it. Click on that. Let's introduce ourselves and give our pronouns and do it quickly. So I'm Roger Kirshner and I go by he, his. Norberto, you're next.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Norberto Delgadillo, and my pronouns are he, him.
Joe?
Hello, my name's Joe Anderson, he, him pronouns.
Hello.
Oh, go ahead, Renee.
Hello, I'm Renee Anderson. Happy Black History Month.
Haley?
I'm Ailey Lowry, she, her pronouns, and I'm the school board liaison to CBRC, one of them. Gary Holland is also a liaison.
Alexandra?
Hello, I'm Alexandra Martin, she, her pronouns. I'm a staff member at PPS.
Ilana?
Hi everyone, Ilana J. Wilson, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. Thank you, Roger.
Fu?
Hi everyone, I'm Win Poole. I go by she, her.
Sean's iPad.
Hi, this is Hobbs. I'm trying to get on my computer. But my name is Hobbs, like I said, and I use he, him pronouns.
Anyone we've left out?
Lisa Selman, and I go by she and her pronouns.
I am Jordan Cooper, they, them pronouns. I'm a staff member.
So if that is everyone, let's move to review or adopt the minutes from the last meeting. I've read them, and for those who were in attendance, can I get a motion from one of you, please?
Did anyone motion on that?
I
I
haven't heard it. Ilana, do you want to make a motion?
want to make a motion. This is Hobbs.
Okay, good.
Y'all need to take a page from Director Green's book. He wants to move every single piece of business because he wants his name in the minutes as much as possible to show that he's contributing. So somebody needs to just decide they're going to be the mover of this meeting, like Director Green.
Well, Ailey, I'm going to be the seconder. So Ilana seconds the motion that is on the table.
Ilana, you can be the seconder. Director Hollins is often the seconder, but there's more of a fight for who wants to second.
So we've got a motion to adopt and a second. All those in favor say aye, please. Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Motion is carried. So the next item on the agenda, is there any follow-up from the last meeting? Well, we're moving right along, I guess. Then Berto, we're now to your presentation about enrollment.
Roger, we have one piece announcement from one of the members before we move on to
Oh.
the presentation.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, let's do that.
I believe that's me, Jordan.
Yeah, that's right, Joe.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So everyone, I'm sorry to say this, but I've had a plethora of personal events come up, and it's just quite overwhelming, and I will be unable to continue on this committee. So I really appreciate the opportunity and all of you, and I wish I could stay on here longer, but unfortunately, I just can't. So, yeah. Thank you all so much.
Joe, I just want to say too, I personally really appreciated your openness and sharing that, and to focus on yourself in this time. I know there's a lot going on in the world and a lot for a lot of folks. So just being able to center yourself in that way is really important. And thank you for the time you have given. I really appreciated the conversations. So,
Absolutely. Just, you took a bite out of the apple. So thank you for giving it a shot and continuing. And to Jordan's point, definitely, take care of what's important to you and center yourself. And thanks for the time. And we'll still be here. So in case you're ever bored, you want to just hop in, I'm sure Roger and the gang wouldn't mind, the committee wouldn't mind you joining.
Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you both so much. Thank you all. And with that, I guess I'm going to head out now.
Have a good school year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for the opportunity. Oh, got something in the chat. Thank you, Ilona. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Now, I guess, Berto, you get to make your presentation about enrollment.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. So now I'm on Zoom, and Jordan, will you be able to share? I just got the I can't share.
oh yes. Do you would you prefer that I share or just open the share settings?
Why don't you share?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Is everyone able to see that? I can't tell on my end. Okay.
Yeah, we see it. I can see it. All right. So wanted to take some time today to catch everyone up on our staffing and enrollment projections. So I think as we think about all the different inputs that go into building the budget, one of the first ones is enrollment, and what that then the subsequent implications with staffing allocations and how that all plays together. So I wanted to take some time this evening and walk us through a handful of slides around our goal to invest some of our one-time dollars. I think as the CBRC committee, y'all got a chance to look at the Budget 101 video. There was information there regarding our federal relief COVID dollars. So when this would also shed some light into how those investments coming to fruition, in addition to how we're advancing some key priorities when we start thinking about the student investment account. So our SIA funding, all within the context of declining student enrollment. So on the next slide, just to put it in perspective, when we think about where we are and what we're anticipating next year, we're projected to be down by more than 3,400 students, which is about 8% of this year's total student enrollment. And how does this reflect at the state level? If you go to the next slide, you get a sense of the number of kindergarten through 12th grade students throughout the state of Oregon. And even between 2019 and 2020, there was this little slight uptick at the state, but then the pandemic happened. And so we've seen this downward trend through this current year. And we're waiting on additional information at the state level. They'll further inform us of like the final impacts, but this is where we're at. And when we look across the state, that's about a 20,000 student loss. And so on the next slide, we have a chance to see kind of like at the district level, what are some of the trends that we've seen. And so you see a few lines here. And to put it in perspective, the green lines are actual enrollment. So in that previous slide, we saw the decline. So this is essentially our version now, like what's happening at the district level compared to the state level. And in October 2020, we see that downward slope, that green line. When we were at that point in time last year, we were also hopeful that our enrollment projections would bounce back up. So that's that blue line. The blue line was essentially our projection. And now that this year started, that blue line's not the case. Based on all the data we have, it's that orange line. So you can see that based on where we were in October 2020 and where we're now anticipating to be based on like the information we have, that downward slope will continue. And so when we look at this information, we see kind of like the horizon, but I think it's also important to get a sense of like, again, like kind of at the next level down, right? So we were looking at the state level, we're getting this slide, which is sharing information at the like district level. And so on the next slide, we see essentially while what's happening kind of like at our school level. So while we project that we'll see no change in student enrollment at the high school level, like high school level is pretty much going to be steady. We do anticipate a decline in student enrollment at the elementary schools, more than 20% decline from student enrollment prior to the pandemic. So when you take a look at these numbers, where we were in school year 2019-20 to where we're anticipated to be next year, we see those changes across the various different grade bands. So as a school system, we are experiencing enrollment decline. And for the most part, the vast majority of it is happening at the elementary level. And I believe, Jordan, you shared the deck. Yeah, okay, great. And if we go to the next slide, there is no single reason for the decline in enrollment. So some of the reasons for this decline include declining birth rates, enrollment patterns, shifting some schools going from K-8s and to K-5s, and individual choices. So every year we work with the Portland Research Center at PSU that inform our projections. So they take a look at everything that's happening across our boundaries and come up with the projections. And that includes neighborhood shifts, that includes rising ninth graders, and a variety of all those pieces and components. And so I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the chat as well. Should I pause here for questions? I wasn't sure if there was a question.
Let's go ahead and let you make your presentation, and each of us can take notes and then ask questions afterwards.
Got it. Sounds good. So then when we go to the next slide, right, student enrollment determines revenue, right? That's student enrollment plays a role in how the revenue funding works, but also it impacts teaching staff. So we have a staffing formula that's based on ratios, and in our budget book and in that budget 101 video, we had an example of like the different staffing formulas and staffing thresholds at our CSI schools, at our title schools. And so the input, the information that comes in is enrollment, which then based on those ratios determines staffing allocations. So when we look at enrollment across the board, we see then that impact with the teaching staff. And so if we go to the next slide, back to the opening comment that we'll target our state. And when we say state, we're looking at, of course, leveraging as much as we can of the general fund, but also our student investment account. And then we also have our ESSER federal dollars to strategically maintain these more than 40 student-facing positions this year. So what does that mean? That really gets into limiting the impact of student enrollment decline, making incremental progress towards class size goals, and prioritizing behavioral and mental health support. So when we start thinking about social workers and maintaining counselors, and then in addition to that, the commitment to maintain and enhance access to the arts education. In the next slide, a little more details around that. So when we start thinking about limiting the impact of student enrollment declines, you can, because of the enrollment shifts across the different schools, some schools will experience broader shifts than others, but for our K-5 schools, we've set a cap so that schools will see no more than a 15% year-to-year change. So across the board, our elementary schools are experiencing about a 20% change, but by establishing a cap at K-5, that's going to preserve an additional 14 homeroom allocation. So what would have normally resulted in 14 less teaching allocations, by capping at 15%, it's actually preserving an additional 14 positions. And then at the same time, when we start thinking about how we're leveraging our student investment account and our federal dollars, we want to make incremental progress towards class size goals. So we will lower the staffing allocation ratio to make progress towards our class size goals. What that means is, in our staffing plan, as an example, we have our thresholds that say, okay, our 5th grade classrooms will have no more than X number of students. And I can't recall off the top of my head what the threshold is, but we're lowering those thresholds to lower class sizes. So the staffing formula that generates the allocations based on enrollment is being adjusted to decrease class sizes as we go through this adjustment. And that will also preserve another 14 homeroom teachers. On the next slide, I mean, some of the examples regarding prioritizing behavioral and mental health supports. So we started assessing our single site administrator schools that may have some additional focus classrooms, being able to provide that resource, keeping and maintaining our student to counselor ratio threshold, adding additional supports for Title I middle schools and K-8 schools. So resulting in maintaining 32 social workers to focus on increasing accessibility to social emotional student supports. And then simultaneously maintaining access to and enhancing access to our arts education, where we intend to add 4.5 or preserve 4.5 FTE art positions across the 9 schools for next year. And what that's going to result is that 75% of all students next year, so a 37% increase from now to then, will have access to both performing and visual arts. So as we're working through the information we have, we know that the less enrollment is causing an impact to the staffing allocation at school sites as there's less students. but also mitigating that impact and simultaneously further investing based on some of our other funding sources in a manner that's targeted based on our schools that have shown some of the highest needs. And so on the next slide, when our commitment is going to be to continue to use our one-time dollars to accelerate learning, limit the impact on declining enrollment, and make significant efforts to improve the educational experience of our students of color. And we're in February and having these conversations. April 26th, that's when we have when superintendent is going to present the complete balanced budget proposal. So over the next few weeks, we're going to continue these conversations, and some of the key pieces of information are going to be where does enrollment at the state level land? So these conversations are happening across the state, happening across the country, but more closely to us, we anticipate getting additional information from the state over the next few weeks, sometime leading into March, around the early March timeframe, that further inform like our overall approach to having the balanced budget. And I think that as we think about the funding sources available to us, is continuing to invest our one-time dollars. We know that there's still pandemic-related health and safety needs, support learning acceleration efforts. We know there's mental behavioral health concerns for our students. And as we think about putting together that balanced budget, we got all of these pieces that we're going to be processing. What's our local revenue going to look like? Or what's the state ADMW going to land at? What additional information do we receive as we continue these conversations are going to be critical for that balanced budget. And so that's the last slide. I think if you go to the next slide, it's just a closing slide. And so a lot of information there, but I know you all also have the deck. So definitely want to open it up for discussion, questions.
So why don't we lead off with Ilana, since you were the first to ask a question. So.
Yeah, I was curious about the potential impact of having the maximum 15% shift, especially for some schools that might end up having like maintaining the amount of students that they're serving or even increasing it. So I'm just curious about, if you can only go down 15%, which I totally understand. I'm curious about the ramifications though.
So like the ramifications if they actually increase students, like if enrollment increase at a school?
Yeah, if it increases at a school, but say another school has a really, really, really incredible decrease, but you can only limit that 15%. Does that take away from the school that has the same amount of students or even?
Oh, I see. So it depends. So there is this net balancing effect. Part of it is, sometimes there's like a term that's used as like rebalance. So you have one school that may have a lot more needs, and then you have another school, not needs, but students. And so enrollment may be higher, and another school enrollment may be lower. And what happens is those teachers could move between school sites to accommodate that. And so you then have a rebalancing of the teaching allocation. So if this school, even at the cap, they still ended up maybe losing an allocation, but you have a school that their enrollment is calls for 2 allocations, then that teaching allocation could shift over to that other school to support their growth. Did that answer the question? Was that the question you were asking?
Yeah. I was just curious about the potential. Yeah, if some schools actually have an increase, what the impacts will be. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and as part of this process, our school leaders receive their staffing information, and there's ongoing conversations. Hey, this seems too low. Like, can you look into this? Or hey, this circumstances. So some of that continues as we go through this process, because there could be pieces of data that could have been missed that maybe cause one of the enrollment projections for a school to look low. So it's like, hey, this doesn't make sense. I know something or a piece of information. So then the team takes that and will adjust accordingly. Yes.
Hey, Renee, did you have a question?
I do. Can I ask it?
Yeah, go.
Okay. So, so I saw where it said in your presentation, you said that you're going to lower class sizes, et cetera, et cetera. And so because of that, instead of being 14 teachers under, we're going to say 14 teachers here. I would just like the number, because I know people have gotten notices already about not being at their school next year. So, well, I know of 3 who've heard, and it's not. Anyway, what I want to know is, when you go through these numbers, how many people does it look like we have to lay off, or how many people are we going to have to hire? Because when you're going through the numbers, I don't know what we're starting with, so I don't know what it means.
And Renee, I just want to say that this stuff is so dynamic. When I was a parent at Llewellyn, my daughter, the woman who ended up being my daughter's 5th grade teacher, got told that she was leaving Llewellyn 3 different years because she was the least tenured teacher, right? But then someone decided to retire, or the foundation raised enough money, or there was an enrollment change and we could retain her. So people get noticed because they have to, because of the way the staffing formula works, and we want to be transparent with people. And yet things continue to change. I was just in a foundation, the Fund for PPS meeting before I came to this one. So it's important. It's really complex and hard, but I think Milberto can give you an answer about some numbers. And I'll let him give that official piece, but it's helpful to keep in mind that just because what people were told today, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what fall is going to look like, because sorry, my cat is rubbing against the laptop as I'm talking. I'm not paying enough attention to him. All right, I'll let
and I understand that, because I've been in the school district for some time, but it looks like you have these numbers, and I just want to know, okay, I have X people in the school right now. Right now, the prediction is that we're going to have to add X number of people or subtract X number of people. So when you go through these numbers of, well, we're going to save some teachers here and we're going to save some teachers here because we're going to have we're going to change the class size. I just want to know what we're starting with, what the prediction is right now, laying off or hiring more teachers.
Yeah. So for the elementary school, like at the elementary school level, right now, we're anticipating about 65. And then at the middle
65
less.
Ooh.
And so, right. And when you put it in perspective, that's about when there's about 20% or so less elementary school students. It starts like thinking about it starts like putting it into perspective, like, okay, 65 less homeroom teachers. At the middle school level, it's about right now we're anticipating about 40 teachers and
less.
And
Okay. I always have to have the plus and minus.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
and then when we start thinking about the yearly turnover, and most of the time turnover every year goes through our natural attrition process. So that's kind of like one of the incentives of trying to get folks to say, hey, I'm retiring early. This is what's happening. I'm submitting my resignation, and really like the big ones when we start thinking about about retirements. And so, Ilona, to your question, like how many, I'm trying to see, like how many will have to move? We're still waiting for that. We don't know for sure. That's still like another piece of information that we're waiting to determine. And, the short answer is that like there's more turnover every year through natural attrition than like the number of like FTE reductions that are planned through less enrollment. There may be some unusual circumstances where it may be a unique credential at one school or something like that may cause like, well, this school's changing their master schedule or elective. And so then this is shifting on this other side. And so that there may be some unusual circumstances, but there's usually more turnover every year through natural attrition that we help absorb this. These about 100 roles that would be impacting that shift. And so as far as teachers receiving notifications, that process did start, I believe, yesterday or Tuesday, sometime this week. And that's part of like the ongoing notification process. Like, hey, there's specific timelines and obligations that need to be met. And to Director Lori's example, then as we get resignation notices or retirement notices, then those adjustments will be occurring over the next few weeks.
Okay, according to my math, you're up to 105 teachers less for the elementary and middle school. I was waiting for you to tell us about the high schools. I happen to volunteer at one of the high schools that's over enrolled. 2150 students starting this school year in a building designed for 1,700. So
right now, the estimate is to add about 5 high school teachers. I don't know how that may or exact the locations, but if we look back at the data, we're anticipating like maybe just a slight increase in high school or almost flat. But the biggest effect has been in our elementary schools, and just kind of thinking about I think the opportunity is how do we increase enrollment? What are sort of the conversations as we start thinking about bringing students back? What does that look like at each area and thinking through that? But as we go through the next few weeks, we'll be getting additional information to help put into perspective, like what then are the additional investment opportunities it may be, and being able to put us in a good place to submit a balanced budget.
At the last board meeting, there was a discussion by some parents presenting concerns about the disbalance that occurs when you have immersion classes competing with neighborhood classes. The neighborhood classes are much larger and have more problems to address than do the immersion classes. What's being done about that?
I don't have information about that. I can ask, and we can take that back and see if what sort of considerations are being done for that. And then Ilona, I can get that information in the chat. How many teachers in total for all levels do we have? I can get that information, including like the percent. Like, hey, what is 65 out of X, right? So as you get a broader sense. In our budget book, one of the tables, it's somewhere in the volume 1 has a breakdown of all like license credentials in elementary. I don't know if it breaks out middle school and secondary, but I know we have it in the table or in the budget book. It's probably somewhere page 200 or something like that. But as I say that, I don't know if Alexandra or Jordan can pull some of that information, but that is information we have there. And if not, we can definitely come back and and share that.
I'm sorry, I missed that part, Roberto. What? Can you say it again? I was typing up the.
Yeah, no worries. As a takeaway, if Alexandra finds it, awesome. If not, as a follow up, in our budget book, we have the table.
I just want to make sure we captured that.
Yeah.
But
You can go, Renee.
so Roger said something about the classes being larger, but you did just mention that the class sizes are going to be smaller next year.
The targeted approach is at our elementary schools, and so that's we'll get that information as well. But it's like each grade band, so we have our CSI schools, we have our title schools, and then we also have like our non-CSI, non-title schools, and so there's targeted investments to reduce the class size. So if the max is 32, then it's going to be adjusted to 30. That is happening. What I don't know, to Roger's question, is how is like the dual language dynamic being played out. That I don't have that information.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and Ilona, yes, that's leveraging the student investment account. That's allowing us to do these targeted investments and supporting the reducing classroom sizes.
Anyone else have a question?
Just ask about, in one of your slides, it mentions the funds and the pandemic and kind of safety protocols. And as we look kind of toward the future, and hopefully some of those protocols will change, and with masks, potentially kids will not be in masks and teachers next year. Do you see that as a possibility that enrollment, that people could potentially either move back into the Portland area and or back to public school? I guess that's my first question. And then second, you mentioned looking at or thinking about how to increase enrollment. And I wonder if the same for teachers, when you think about retention and everything that has happened the last 2 years of really trying to, what is the school district going to do to maintain teachers, right? You know, here we're looking at laying off, but then on the flip side, there's been a lot of shift and changes these last 2 years. So I don't know if you have anything for us on that piece of it too.
Regarding, as we enter the next phase of the pandemic, I don't have any information if that's going to attract more families. I mean, one could be hopeful, me personally, but I don't have any specific data. Just kind of anecdotally, maybe families, more students are vaccinated. There's more comfort in coming back, or just ease of not dealing with masks or whatever. We don't have any specific information that would lead us to believe that may increase enrollment or not. And then as far as like the strategy around talent retention and mitigating talent attrition, that is a big focus for our HR team, and really thinking about all different aspects of the school. And one of the key things that the board recently approved was adjusting our school leaders' salary as well, and calibrating them to really bring in new school leaders as well, continue with maintaining and retaining school leaders, because having consistent school leadership also is a critical role. And then as we go through these conversations with our labor partners, I'm sure that's also going to be front and center around what we do to support. But I don't have all the details. Maybe that's something we can get back to you and see how those efforts are panning out.
Anyone else have a question? Raise your hand, please.
I have a question. So I know we shared the numbers on how many teachers we're losing due to, the enrollment numbers and all that stuff. Does that also include the numbers of some assistant principals that some schools have? Or is that separate?
Yeah.
That's separate. So that's separate. So that's something
Okay.
I can come back because there's also the way the formula works. There'll be adjustments to like the assistant principals and because it's also based on enrollment. So that number of about 105, that was like really just like teach home elementary and middle school. So I can come back and share kind of what the net effect is across our schools.
Okay, because I know that you did mention that you want to make it so that it's beneficial for the schools and all that stuff. So I was just, because I know one school that has a teacher of color that is losing their position, and that greatly affects the school because I know PPS is saying we're trying to make it equitable and it's all for the kids. So that's the reason why I want to know what the number of schools that are losing assistant principal is, especially in hard times right now, that they are like a key factor in supporting and making sure things run smoothly along with the principal. So that was like one of my concerns that I wanted to bring up and ask.
Yeah. And I can get that information and just thinking about, obviously thinking about like the 15% rule and things that we can try to mitigate within the locus of our control. But then also, I don't know all the, like, Dr. Lori, you mentioned teacher as an example who was like a novice teacher, kind of like one of the least seniority. So if it's like, hey, we have our teachers of color or BIPOC teachers. And so that, as much as the obvious benefit to the school of keeping that, but there may be other considerations that may prevent that teacher from staying.
Okay, thank you so much.
Other questions?
Do we have numbers? So we know we lost a lot of students, and you did say there were numerous reasons why we lost students, and this is a statewide issue. Do we have numbers of how we lost the students? So for example, we don't know where they are. We just know we lost the students.
Yeah.
Okay. So because I do know, just a few cases, because I know teachers who know some of the people personally.
Yeah.
I just know some people just decided they're not going to go to school until COVID's over.
Yeah.
But they're still in their house, and they're doing kind of sort of homeschooling, but not really. But so that's why I asked, because I'm thinking there might be a lot of people who it's just COVID.
Or right, if maybe they're at the local parochial school or something that maybe once the next phase of the pandemic, then they come back. Right. Yeah.
But that's why I wanted to know if there were any numbers.
Yeah, and that's a lot of like the type of information we try to incorporate, but then it gets into, we need to hear from families and being able to just share, whether it's like reaching out to our enrollment team, reaching out to the school, and being able to commit to come back. that I think is the dilemma, and then also just like the patterns we see across the state, the patterns we're seeing across the country as lots of shifts occur. It is going to be, the next few months will be interesting as we really try to like just get information, pick some information, but then be ready to make adjustments. And just from a normal process perspective, as the school year starts, there is this like enrollment assessment process that's happening. And so, as a former educator, Renee, like, oh my God, I got more kids, or my school has an extra 100 students. I need support ASAP. So those processes will continue to be in place, and us being readily able to then support as we see those shifts happen.
Yeah. And I also know from teachers that, well, these are high school teachers, so a number of high school teachers who have a larger load than they should have. So, but on the other hand, we were low on teachers, and so we were hiring teachers, or PPS was hiring teachers after school started. They were still hiring teachers because they didn't have enough teachers. So, and we keep hearing that we need more subs because there's not enough adults in the building. So I'm just confused.
It's a tough jigsaw puzzle, right? With so many pieces moving and having to start the budgeting process, right? And when we say budgeting, I'm thinking more about enrollment and the allocations that happen at school sites. Principals need to start thinking about what next year's going to look like, and so it's being able to move with the information we have.
Well, historically, the K-5 cohort doesn't have much choice in their curriculum, but it starts around the middle school where you begin to introduce electives but I guess you've got language emerging at the lower grades and so on. But at high schools, you know, you're having students forecast and so on, and lo and behold, you know, you got a whole increased interest in physics and chemistry, and so you need more of those guys, and nobody's interested in French or whatever, you know. And so there's adjustments that are constantly being made in forecasting what staffing needs are going to be, and I wonder some of the concerns that have been expressed. Don't they fall on the reconnect folks at the district in terms of trying to determine the why and wherefores of why students are dropping out and are going elsewhere? So.
And Roger, I got distracted with the chat in full transparency. And my apologies if you asked me a question.
Well, I just said some of the concerns that have been expressed, don't they fall on the shoulders of the reconnect folks and to determine what's causing dropout and disinterest in continuing PPS and so on?
I don't have information or too much familiarity with the Reconnect team or folks, and so I would need to get back and provide some information on that. I'm not sure what the strategies are or who the team members are there, so it would be something worth exploring to see what sort of come back to PPS or come enroll at PPS campaign looks like.
I was in conversation just this morning with the person that, or one of the persons at Franklin that mentors teachers, and I was of concern. You know, nationally, every district is looking for teachers of color, and there's more demand than there is supply of teachers, but also those who might be attracted from Alabama or someplace like Oklahoma or something, you know, might not find that living in Oregon is such a pleasant thing, and leave for that reason, or teaching isn't the ideal profession that they thought it was, and leave and so on. So those attrition rates sometimes can be rather alarming, but it's I think that mentorship is a very important program, and I'd like to see that continue.
I just want to add, as we're having this conversation about declines, that if you look at the Oregon Public Broadcasting story about Portland Public Schools declining enrollment, the last paragraph talks about statewide and Multnomah County, but state of Oregon has lost 30,000 students year over year. So it's a pretty substantial decline statewide. And so we do know that the birth rate is a factor. We do know in the article, it also states that Multnomah County districts have higher decline in enrollment than districts outside of Multnomah County. So we know, we can see that as gentrification, right? That people are getting pushed out of Multnomah County and it's not such a desirable place to live. So as we have these conversations, I think we need to be mindful that other districts, I think Beaverton is one that's also, people have not been as proactive and on the ball as our team because we're a larger district to get this information out so quickly. But other districts are having very similar cuts. So as we think about recruitment, there may be teachers coming from other districts as well, especially smaller districts where they don't have as much attrition year to year that might be also recruited to PPS. But the birth rate in Oregon went down 13 births per 1,000 women across 10 years. So that's a pretty significant drop. I'm trying to find the actual numbers, but there were 39,000 babies born in 2020. And I'm trying to find the 2010 number, but it's a substantial decrease over time.
And that's what the demographer, some of that data is what the demographers have used, because that eventually becomes our kindergarten cohort 5 years from now. And so that's part of the rationale why that decline continues into the upcoming years.
There was a huge drop in Oregon birth rate starting in 2016, and I can't think of any reason why that would have happened. That's my one political statement for the night.
Well, there's obviously going to be more conversations. We're going to have more data. We know we have a few takeaways here. And as we continue to work towards the proposed budget in April, we'll be coming back and continuing kind of shedding light into the developments, how the plan's coming together with our federal relief dollars, the student investment account. And so if there aren't any more questions, I'll turn it over to Roger. Although Ilona, you're off mute, so maybe you have a question.
Yeah, I was curious about my question in the chat, which is thinking back to our conversation last time about how we're failing specifically our Black students at the lower levels. How does the algorithm take into account this and addressing this? Since that age group is the one that's losing the most teachers.
Sorry, were you thinking of staff or students?
Staff, and how we're going to serve and make sure that those disparities for Black students are not as big as they currently are.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that, and I know that one of the things I can do that I know of is to talk to our HR team and be able to just get some feedback. But I don't have specific information from that. In our strategic plan, it is called out as one of a very specific goal to increase the diversity and BIPOC community of our staff. That is called out, and that is part of like how we want our culture to be. So when we start thinking about, what sort of engagement are we doing to recruit teachers or to recruit staff? I mean, it gives me a smile when I sit down with Dr. Adams and Dr. Proctor and to prominent Black leaders in our district, and to be able to have these conversations. And so there is that concerted effort. And then what does it translate across our schools? What does that look like? I think that I don't have exact details to be able to lay out a specific plan, but not that people are not thinking about it. I think it's the biggest thing I'd like to say. It is on people's mind, but I will certainly connect with our Chief of Human Resources, Sharon Reese, and be able to see what sort of additional details we can share and bring to CBRC.
And I know as Alana, as we focus on our Black and Native students especially, that the superintendent is deploying extra resources to our schools with our highest needs. So our TSI and CSI schools will continue to receive reading specialists, additional personnel. So he's got a whole host, a very he's building a very bold, comprehensive plan to live into the strategic plan with his staff and navigating, given these cuts, maintaining a high level of service at those schools so that we improve on our outcomes and the achievement gap. So I think if you're talking about students specifically, one of the things I'm really proud about with PPS is we don't do just an algorithm-based budget anymore. It's not just about numbers, it's also about need. So our budget does live into those values, and there will be places where schools may have the same number of students, but because, like, I think about Whitman, which is in my zone, so I know it a little better than other schools, they have more counselors and mental health support staff because of the population that lives there, or a place like Route, because they serve a neighborhood that has large refugee housing. They have different resources because it's not just the 400 students at Grout or at Whitman, but it's what those students specifically need is different than what students at Llewellyn need. So we have a responsive budget that focuses on racial equity and social justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Director Lori. And Ilona, I would call out a page, or in volume 2, I know there's I keep going back to the budget book. It is a big book. But if you look at volume 2, in case you're curious, there's like a heat map that essentially lists all the different schools and then provides information regarding the demographics. Is it a Title I school? And then a sense of the investment per student. So getting to, at least from an analytical perspective, trying to showcase some of that. And that's part of like the concerted effort with the conversations that are happening right now to really get into targeted conversations around supporting our Black and Native students.
Roger that. And it definitely makes sense. I'm just always curious about, we were talking about maintaining those services essentially at those schools. And I, because of who I am, et cetera, believe that doing the same thing and expecting different results will not work. So that's why I'm asking about the, like if there will be additional, investments in that piece. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
I do think we always need to consider what our strategic investments have been and are ongoing, and whether they're achieving the desired result, and evaluating whether they're accomplishing that. I was just thinking of the comment about counselors that was made. And I know the number of counselors that we have at Franklin, for example, and they essentially equate to the same number that I had at Cleveland in 1961. So I don't know that there's been a great improvement along that line. So.
They're down in counselors at Franklin.
And Roger, I have another question, but I wanted to leave space if other people have questions.
Oh. Well, go ahead, Ilana.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I always have a lot of questions because I'm very curious. I'm curious whether the district is going to reduce CBO's needed annual SIA investments in favor of more of these targeted investments that you've been talking about.
So there's been a commitment to continue to fund CBOs like at the rate we've been doing. So there's two components to it. One is a general fund. So there's like this a natural or there's not natural, but it's I can't think of the acronym, unfortunately, but there is a funding formula that comes out from the general fund. And that one, net operating expenditure, that's the word I was thinking of. So the net operating expenditure is a formula that basically says, oh, PPS is spending at a certain rate per student. So then there's a component of that CBOs get a funding rate based on this formula. Then there's a student investment account. So the student investment account is based on ADMW, which is like the weight that's associated to a student based on specific demographic components. It could be need based on economically, socioeconomic status, based on language status. And so that formula is still intact. So what would happen would be dependent on like the enrollment at the CBOs, and like if their need changes, that would then fluctuate like the formula component. This year, about maybe a month ago or so, there was an additional investment done to support CBOs during this like COVID pandemic, and that additional investment came out of the student investment account as well. And that was like one time. So it was like outside of the formula. But for next year, the idea is that, okay, the formula dynamics are not changing with the community-based organizations. And so as we think about what sort of general fund impact happens to us, right? If our net operating expenditure, which we can have a fun time next time looking at that calculation, changes, then that can potentially impact their enrollment. So if we're spending less on students because our budget is down, then that would impact them. If we're spending more on students, then that would benefit CBOs. For SIA, it's more based on the needs of the students, because that's how the state distributes the funding for SIA. So we basically use that same formula to pass it on through our CBOs.
But since we know that our students of color have been more affected by COVID and their gap has grown, we should be getting more money for those students, correct?
So that's the hope. We'll see. Part of the student investment account is funded through a lot of the corporate tax activity and kind of like what's happening at the state level. So that bucket of funding is set at the state level, and then depending on need across the state, it gets distributed. So you know, if Beaverton or Salem Kaiser have more need, they would get a bigger portion of that, and so then we would need to adjust accordingly. However, a lot of the early information we're getting is that we don't anticipate a decline in our student investment account, that at a minimum it'll continue and be steady, which is like a healthy $36 million in SIA that we receive. But that's another piece of information that over the next few weeks, we're going to get additional confirmation from the state.
And they're, well, okay.
Can we talk next time too about how need is described, just more in depth, if possible, or you can send us information to read on the off as well.
Yep, sure thing.
And how aligning those 8 programs is going to help or not help. That Scott 9, aligning. I just attended this, but the meeting that Scott 9's been doing. There's another one on March 10th, and taking the 8 programs, and the districts only have to now write one.
Oh, the consolidated.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So that is exciting. So I'd like to put it into context at the state level. there's like all these different funding streams. So you heard me talk about an investment account. There's also M98, Measure 98. There's like this other thing. And so each one has like this specific like reporting guidelines and a variety of different unique needs that need to be met in order to report and achieve certain goals laid out. And so the state is doing a concerted effort to consolidate all of that, bring it all together and encourage us, which is something we've been thinking about when we talk about braiding our resources, is like a collective strategy. So that's exciting to see that happening at the state. That will benefit a lot of how we approach and design our strategies and what happens at our schools. And so I'm hopeful that as that continues, it just continues to provide just more like insight into like strategies and opportunities as we work together, whether it's with other districts or see what kind of information the state collects. That I think that'll also be insightful.
Are there other questions and questions for the staff to respond to between now and our next meeting?
I would just ask Jordan or Alexandra if you captured Ilona's last request around like how we definition for need. Yeah, great.
We got it. Yeah. Between the two of us, we're keeping up.
Again, I want to thank the staff. You've been fantastic in every regard, and you're just a tremendous support to this committee. So, are there any other questions?
Just would also like to thank our incredible board members as well that have participated and added information and good context as well.
Love you.
Indeed.
Ailey makes the big bucks, you know.
Alana, I met Alana at Stanford Children, and she is incredible. So I think there's a little bit of a mutual love society happening around here. And met Renee at like feedback night. And that's one of the best things about the school board job is you get to meet so many really cool people who are so passionate about our community and our kids.
Thank you.
The head
Some
of
of you I haven't gotten to meet in person yet, but as soon as CBRC gets back together, we will. And of course, Roger, he had to put up with me back in my CBRC days. So.
Well, I was going to point out that Latoya Fick, who is head of Stand Up for Children, is a former chair of CBRC. So, Jordan, would you remind us when our next meeting is?
Yeah, so the next meeting is scheduled for March 3rd, 5 to 7 p.m.
Try to get home early.
So, are there any requests for agenda items for that meeting? Jordan and I will be conferring to construct the agenda for the next meeting. Hearing none, I guess, are we any requests for good for the order? If not, we'll adjourn.
I think we're good.
Thank you very much, Berto, for your presentation about enrollment. It's always very fascinating and a challenge every year. So thank you very much for your participation tonight, committee members and staff, and we'll wish you all a good evening, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.